Welcome in, everyone, to a very special episode of the David Hookstead Show. Today, we are joined by author and former Navy SEAL, Jack Carr. We're very excited to have you here. Thanks for coming on, Jack. This is going to be fun.
Oh man, thanks so much for having me. I always love talking about books and current events and military stuff and all the things that you guys talk about.
Well, you're in the right place. So I got to be honest with you. A few years ago, one of my best friends, we were talking about what are we reading, what are we watching, and he said there's this book out called The Terminal List, and it's written by this guy named Jack Carr. And he's like, you would love it. It's violent, it's dark, people die. And I never followed up on that. And then about a year ago, he reminded me of it. And I actually reached out to one of your publicists and I was like, hey, give me these books. I need to check these things out. I blew through The Terminal List. I couldn't believe that was one hell of an adrenaline filled ride. So thank you. I mean, what was the motivation? Let's start there. What motivated you to create James Reese, this all around badass character with The Terminal List to start the series?
Yeah, well, I always knew the two things I wanted to do in life were serve my country in the military, specifically as a Navy SEAL. I found out what SEALs were when I was 7. And when you're growing up, in the early 80s, there's not much really written about SEALs. You can find a few things here and there, a chapter in a book, magazine article in Soldier of Fortune or Gung Ho magazine, which was a spin-off back then, but there wasn't that much. And so about age 10, 5th grade, I started reading the things my parents were reading. That meant Tom Clancy, David Morrell, Nelson DeMille, A.J. Cannell, Jesse Pollock, Mark Olden, all these authors who had protagonists with typically back then Vietnam experience as a Marine sniper, as an Army Special Forces guy, as a CIA paramilitary officer, or as a Navy SEAL. So I was reading these books and I was just loving them. My mom was a librarian, so I grew up with this love of reading and always knew that one day after my time in the military, I'd write the same kind of books that I was enjoying back then. So I essentially gave myself an education in the art of storytelling back then when I didn't have all these different biases and filters built up over a lifetime of experience or whatever. As we get cynical, maybe as we get older, I was reading them at age 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And so I was enjoying them for what they were back then, 1983, 85, 87, 90, 93, and just having the greatest experience. And so I knew that was my path. So as I was getting out of the military, I started to do just that, write the same kind of book that I loved reading growing up and that I've continued to read all my life. And but I always wanted to also move the genre forward a little bit. I just didn't want to copy what someone else had done or try to become a version of them. I wanted to be the best version of myself. Just like as a SEAL, my goal was always to be the best operator, best leader I could possibly be. As an author, my goal was to move the genre forward, even if it's just by a degree. And then, of course, to write the best book I possibly could, and then to get better and better with each with the next novels.
Well, there's no doubt you hit it out of the park. And one of the things that really stuck out to me when I'm reading your stuff is it feels very authentic. And what I mean by that is the details. You get into the nitty gritty details of the specific kind of weapons, the specific kind of gear, the specific kind of coffee. So I'm curious, what percentage of James Reese and the characters in James Reese's world are based off of real people and or real events that you experienced? Is it 70%, 80%? I mean, how much of this is tied directly to your life experience?
I think the lawyers would like me to say 0% for other people. Everything is completely made up. But no, just like with anything in life or anything in the realm of fiction, we're the conglomeration of our experiences. And so there are certainly touch points with real people, real events in the pages of each and every novel, but specifically to The Terminal List, that first one, I don't think it would have resonated the way it did had it not been so closely tied to reality, so closely, not just with the gear and weapons manipulations and all that sort of a thing, but to specific people that really stood out to me over my time in uniform or over my life in general. So I think those things really made it stand out, made it very personal. And then I could tie in, although the book is complete fiction, I really tied in the emotions and the feelings behind what it felt like to say, do the sniper job in Ramadi or to get ambushed in Baghdad. And although I didn't write about those events, I wrote about them in a fictional sense. So let's say they take place, let's just say in Los Angeles. Well, I can take the feelings and emotions behind getting ambushed in Baghdad and tie those into the story. So it feels like it's real because the feelings and emotions come from a real place. So I think that really made it stand out to Simon & Schuster because they see thousands of these things cross their desks every year. And this one stood out to them and it stood out to readers. Thank goodness.
Yeah, well, it stood out to readers in a big way. And were there any unexpected challenges that you met? I mean, any job, there's always, whether it's being a Navy SEAL or being a firefighter, whatever it might be, always challenges. But what were some of the biggest challenges when it came to writing a hit book series? And then what were some challenges that you really didn't expect, but you encountered, along the way?
Well, I'll take that last one first. I didn't think you had to do anything as a writer other than write. I didn't realize until maybe a month before the first book came out and Terminalist came out in March of 2018. I didn't realize that you had to do anything that you would have to do for any business. So you have to do marketing and advertising and social media and engagement and budgets, strategic plans, like all that sort of a thing. I thought you just wrote, sent it to New York, and then went back to your cabin in the mountains and wrote the next one. That was my vision of what an author did. And that's one of the reasons why it was so appealing, because I love being in the mountains. I love being by myself. I love writing. So all those things really appealed, but really it's a startup. And anything that you do as a startup out of your garage with a product, doesn't matter what it is, you have to do as an author today. Maybe back in 1965, 75, 85, 95, you could have gotten away with just writing and then having your publicist set you up with a week of interviews the week of your book drops, and then you go back to writing. But today, when people want that authenticity piece that you mentioned, they want that engagement on social media, they want to know you. They just don't want, their product has to be great, but also you have to engage with that audience. The outliers are the ones that don't have to do that. The outliers would be something like a Harry Potter series or a 50 Shades of Grey or a Twilight or something like that. But if you're not those three or maybe four or five, then you can literally build a readership on your own today through podcasts, through social media, through engagement, through all these other things that you couldn't have done 30 years ago, 40 years ago, certainly 50. So that was a surprise. I didn't think about that at all. I have no background in business or marketing or any of that sort of thing. So I looked at that when I realized that you had to do these things. I just looked at it the same way I would look at a problem on the battlefield and look for gaps, look for ways to adapt, to capitalize on momentum, take advantage of these things that didn't exist in the past. So that was the most surprising. And then on the other side of it, and the writing side of it, I didn't have a social media account when I was in the military or leaving the military. I didn't worry about getting an agent. I didn't know I needed one. I just knew Emily Bessler at Simon & Schuster would be my editor and publisher because I saw her in the back of Vince Flynn's books and Brad Thor's books, and they thanked her. And I said, okay, that's going to be my editor publisher. And she is today. Never crossed my mind that the book would not get to her, that she would not love it and want to publish me. And that at the same time, being a child of the 80s, it's very natural to think of an actor to portray your character and a director to direct. And so it never occurred to me that Chris Pratt would not portray James Reese, my main character, or that Antoine Fuqua would not direct. So I really wasn't dissuaded. I didn't have any bandwidth. I think it's because I didn't waste any bandwidth on worrying about those things. And I think that's because I wanted to do them from such an early age that I still had that naivete that's attached to the things that you want to do when you're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and you think you can do anything. I never stopped thinking that. So all those things kind of came to fruition. So the biggest surprise was the business side. But I love learning new things. So it's fun and natural for me to adapt.
Well, on the business side, you have a rather large following on Twitter and Instagram, and it's very much geared towards the exact same audience, obviously, that reads your book, kind of that military crowd, that outdoor crowd, that Second Amendment crowd. Do you enjoy the social media stuff? Because you seem really good at it. You generated a large following, or do you view it more as this is just the price of doing business? It's just a chip we got to put on the table.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously benefits, huge benefits to it. There's a lot of negatives to it as well, and you can focus on those negatives. But to me, it's a way to say thank you. And I feel so fortunate that I can do what I love doing. But the only reason I can do it is because someone took a risk on me as a new author and then told a friend. And whether they told that friend on a smoke break at work, or they told that friend, the 3 friends that follow them on Instagram, or the 35 million friends that follow them on Instagram, I'm so thankful to each and every one of them for taking that risk and then for expending their political capital by telling friends about it. So I use social media. I try to thank everybody still, like late at night, my wife's asleep next to me. I'm still scrolling through saying thank you, sincerely appreciate it, hitting that heart button, because that all comes from a real place. I'll never take for granted that people have trusted me with their time they're never going to get back. And whether that's listening to the audiobook for 12 hours, 15 hours, or they're in the pages of the book for however long it takes them to go through that, or they're scrolling through Instagram and stop on my feed or make a comment. they're never going to get that time back. So I put as much thought into any sentence that goes on Instagram or Twitter as I do into any sentence on the book or to any guest or question that I have on my podcast, because people are trusting me with that time, and they're never getting that back. And that's something that I take very seriously.
Speaking of your podcast, which is outstanding, I encourage everyone listening to this to give that a listen to as well. What is the name of your podcast for our audience?
Danger Close, Beyond the Books with Jack Miller.
So I listened to your entire interview with Mark Owens, who wrote No Easy Day, obviously. Fascinating for so many different reasons. But one of the most fascinating things that applied to you specifically in that interview was you talked about how even though these books are fiction, you still submit them to the Pentagon Review. And could you walk us through why, when this is complete fiction, it's not real, like you just said, why the Pentagon is still adamant that they kind of they can weigh in and tip the scales?
Right. I might have not even thought of that had I written these books in, let's say, 2000 or even 2005 or something like that. But after the publication of No Easy Day and everything that came about because of that, really precedent had been set, particularly on the fiction side, to not submit to the Department of Defense, to their Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review. But with the publication of that book and all the fallout from it, of course, I got lawyers and asked them what I should do. And lawyers, being very careful, wanting to keep you out of trouble, they recommended submitting. So I did. So that first one, they in the terminal list, they advertised 30 days. And actually, what you sign in the military says they will get back to you in 30 days. So I didn't expect them really to be able to keep that promise or remain true to that contract, but they got back in 45 days, which was a shocker. I thought, wow, that's pretty good. And they took out, I think in the first book, 9 sentences or something like that. So the second book, I did the same thing. And I don't know what changed between the first and the second one, but they took out 54 in that second book. They're a phrase or a paragraph or a sentence or a word. So at this point now I can maybe afford lawyers a little more. So I appealed, and you're allowed to appeal within a certain amount of time. And so the lawyers attached every single sentence that they have redacted to a publicly available government document. So not something on Wikipedia or someone else's book or anything like that, but to a document that you can get, anyone in the world can download from the United States government. And we tied every single one of those 54, and they let me win on 37. So if someone goes to the paperback, they can see which ones were unredacted. So you can compare the hardcover with all the 54 redactions to the 37 that I won in the paperback, which is interesting because there's a location that they took out that I totally made up. And in the hardcover, it's redacted. Even references to the architecture of the area, the mountains in the area are all redacted. I won it on appeal. And so I created a CIA black site. I created it in Morocco and totally made up. I've never had any touch point with Moroccan intelligence services or government officials or military or anything like that. And a quick look at my military file would tell anybody doing the review that. But I'd been to Morocco before the military. I love Morocco. It was beautiful and it made sense for the story. So I wanted to use it, and I put it in there. They redacted it, won it on appeal. So what does that tell us now? Well, it tells us there's probably a CIA black site in Morocco.
Yeah.
Had they not redacted that at all and then not let me win it on appeal, no one would ever know. So anyway, then I did it for the third book, Savage Son, as well. They took out, I forget how many sentences out of that one. I went to appeal, and then they wouldn't let me appeal for some reason. And I think it was their way of saying, quit bothering us with this fiction stuff. We have more important things to do. So I didn't do the last 2 books. So The Devil's Hand and this last one, In the Blood. And I'm glad, because I did so much research into bioweapons and bioweapons research for The Devil's Hand. And for this one, I went deep down the rabbit hole into quantum computing and artificial intelligence and mass data collection and surveillance of US citizens. So I think they probably would have taken a lot out had I given them the opportunity, but none of that came from my time in uniform. It all came from essentially what I think a journalist does. A lot of interviews, and when people have touch points with something that's sensitive, they try to leave things out. But if you'd say you interview 20 people, they all leave different things out. You can really put that puzzle together. You can put that, you can kind of really paint that mosaic. And that's what I did for the last 2 novels.
That is, to me, that's just mind blowing, because I enjoy doing interviews. I enjoy writing stuff like that. And it's fiction. So when I heard you say that in that interview, I had to rewind. I'm like, did I just hear that correctly? That the Pentagon is striking, or the Department of Defense, technically, whatever it is striking fictional things. And that story about the Morocco location, that's wild. But I'll tell you, some of these people in the government, so I do a lot of military interviews, and when I meet some people, I'll talk about, I did this interview with so-and-so, and some of these government officials, they'll give you dirty looks if they feel like, you're talking about stuff. But again, some of it's public information. So it's not, some hidden secret. So In Blood, obviously, you just mentioned it. I made a note, forgot to at the beginning. That comes out this month. Remind me of what the specific day is.
May 17th, hitting shelves May 17th, audio, ebook, and hardcover.
There you go. So if you haven't started the James Reese series, you're watching this, start with Terminalist, phenomenal, work your way up. And then we're going to get in here real quick into the Terminalist show. But before I get into that, has there been any backlash from people within the industry? Because the books are like a hard R rating with violence. I mean, you're talking about shooting people in the head. I love it. I love action movies. I love all that stuff. But have they ever like kind of subtly been like, hey, would you mind toning it down? Would you mind maybe taking some of this out? Or are they just like, look, they're a hit. We're going to let him do his thing.
Yeah, so I didn't know what to expect going into this because I have no background in it. I just got my book to the right person at Simon & Schuster, that exact person I wanted, Emily Bessler. And I thought, wow, okay, Emily wants this. So she's going to make it great. There's going to be a ton of edits and that's fine. If she wants aliens from outer space to come down and make this into like a Michael Bay type of a film, like that, I'll trust her. And very few edits. There were about 3 things that she said, and I'm talking about content edits here, not punctuation and grammar. But she said, hey, would he really say this here? Would he do this here? And then a third thing that I can't even remember. But very few edits on the content front. And I didn't know what it would be like going into Simon & Schuster, because typically these larger publishing houses lean a little bit to the left. And I thought maybe they would somehow hint or come right out and say, hey, you need to take this Second Amendment stuff out, or this or that, or here, this is what we've seen with our metrics that sells more. Never have they ever even hinted that I should even change anything or be a little less graphic or take out any of the Second Amendment stuff or anything that's perceived as a little more right leaning or conservative, or make my character a little more center of the road so as not to upset one side or the other. Never. And that is so cool because I've had complete creative control, and I wouldn't do it anyway, but it takes that out of me having to then figure out how to politically maneuver and keep it in while at the same time still getting published, and none of that. That's never even part of the calculus. And it was never part of the calculus in the first book. I think maybe some people out there that are writing a book might be thinking about that, thinking about because the Michael Jordan has the quote, about Republicans and Democrats buying shoes or whatever he had. So I don't know if that plays today. People want authenticity. I don't think they want somebody that's just tiptoeing around or afraid to say something that they feel, or, and I think a lot of people do put their characters down the middle of the road, and maybe it's for that reason. I don't know, but that was not me. And I was never going to do something like that. That would be miserable. I think that'd be a horrible writing experience. So that would never even cross my mind. And then Simon & Schuster has never even hinted. And also cool, I didn't know how it was going to be with Amazon for the series. And, they were concerned about some of those things you just mentioned as it went up the chain. After you get to a certain stage, the scripts go up all the way up to the top, and then they come all the way back down with these notes and, this big production, tons of money, tons of people, like it's a big investment. And so they were concerned about a couple of things, but to Amazon's credit, they came down on the right side of everything. And that I guess I didn't know what to expect. But with Antoine Fuqua at the helm and Chris Pratt, and then me and the showrunner were figuring it out. And I guess, it's all about relationships and trust at the end. And at the end of the day, they trusted us with some of the things that we wanted to keep in there. And really cool with test audiences, those scenes that we kept in there that they might've been a little bit nervous about, they have just been tested off the charts. So that's amazing.
Well, that's incredibly refreshing to hear, because obviously we hear a lot of people who tell stories where they feel like they were censored or they were steamrolled. And it's nice to hear that they trust you and let you do what you want to do. And now we're going to get in. I do want to talk about the TV part of your life story here. But to your point about keeping those scenes in, obviously, as anyone who's read The Terminalist knows, that's not a show you could put on like CBS or ABC unless you were going to heavily edit it back. And it sounds like what you're saying is because it's on Amazon, we're going full steam ahead. We're going 100 miles per hour. And should fans expect it to be just as intense as crazy as the book is?
Yeah, I think so, but also a little different. Now you're telling a story visually, so I knew going in that things were going to change. So there's some characters that are morphed into one. So you have 8 hours essentially to tell this story. Some characters aren't in there. There's some characters that are new. But what was important to me and to Antoine Fuqua, the director, and to Chris Pratt was that we keep that gritty, violent, primal, dark nature of the book, and we added this psychological thriller element that they talked to me about right off the bat, and I thought, interesting, and it works so well telling this story visually to add. So it's a revenge thriller like the book, but there's also this psychological element that tells the story and propels it forward as well, and I think it works so well, and I could not be more thrilled with it. So yeah, I feel extremely fortunate.
And I've heard you say many times before, and correct me if I'm repeating this back to you wrong. Chris Pratt optioned the book even before it came out, right?
Yeah, that was crazy. So as I'm typing this thing, he's only in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's not in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's not in Avengers. He's not in Jurassic World. He's in Parks and Rec as Andy Dwyer, the lovable overweight guy. And
Great
then
show.
Very great show. And then has a very small role in Zero Dark 30 as a SEAL. So I saw this transformation, and then that's where I really became aware of him. Really was from the SEAL portrayal in Zero Dark 30 about the Bin Laden raid. And then so I'm typing away here. No one knows who I am. I have no social media presence. Obviously, I'm not coming from politics or sports or anything like that. No connections to publishing, no connections to Hollywood. He has no idea who I am. Antoine has no idea who I am. Emily Bessler has no idea who I am. And I never really worried about that. I thought Chris Pratt is the guy. He's going to portray James Reese. He's an actor that has done a lot of funny stuff, and he needs to do something more serious, just like Tom Hanks did with Philadelphia in the early 90s after doing a decade of comedy. And I thought Chris Pratt's the guy. And somewhere I think I also read, I think maybe I saw a Vanity Fair article or something that had him talking about military a little bit, or I got a hint that this was a guy's guy. Like somehow, I'm not really sure where that came from, but for whatever reason, Chris Pratt was the guy. I didn't want anybody who had already done these sorts of movies before. I wanted somebody new that needed to take a risk, that needed to show his audience that he could do different types of things. And man, he crushes it in this. So how he found out about it was that I got a call about 5 months before the book came out. So it came out in March 2018. I got a call in November of 2017 from an old SEAL buddy, and I hadn't talked to him in 5 years. And he calls me out of the blue, and he said, asked if I remembered him, and I said yes. And then he said, "Do you remember what you did for me in the SEAL teams?" And I said, "No, I don't remember." And he said, "Well, you're the only person that sat me down in your office. You talked about transitioning out of the military. You introduced me to people in the private sector. You're the only person that took the time to do that, and I sincerely appreciate it. And I always wanted to thank you." And I said, "No problem. How's it going?" And he said, "It's going great, but I heard you have a book coming out." And I said, "Yeah, it's coming out in a few months. I can send you an early copy. It's called a galley. It's like a rough draft." And he said, "Yeah, I'd like that, but I also like to give it to a friend of mine." And I said, "Yeah, who's that?" And he said, "Chris Pratt." I was like, "Oh, well." So he read it in my friend Jared Shaw, who also produces the show, is an actor in the show and a technical advisor in the show as well. He gave it to Chris. He read it first in November, then he gave it to Chris in December. Chris read it at the end of December and then called the next week and wanted to option it before it even hit shelves. So, and the other crazy part of that is another SEAL buddy got it somehow to Antoine Fuqua, who was the only director I ever wanted to direct it. So they wanted it at the same time. And then Antoine called Chris and said, "Let's do this thing together." And now we're all three executive producers on the show.
So it sounds like the SEAL community is well ingrained with your favorite people in Hollywood, which is good news, obviously.
Yeah, so wild. I mean, it's so wild. I mean, there's not that people think SEALs are all over Hollywood with hair gel and sunglasses and all that sort of thing, and that's not really the case. I just got extremely fortunate that two of my two friends, people that trusted me and wanted to help, did so.
Is it at this point when they option it before it even comes out, you start thinking, okay, this might turn into a really, really big deal? Or was it after the book? Because I mean, it's a big deal. That's just the fact of the matter. But at what point to you as the author were you like, okay, like we did this, like this is now a real thing. It is rolling. The momentum is real. We are here. We made it.
I thought that the whole time. So, but people have told me, hey, even if it's option, in Hollywood, in New York, they see this all the time. Books get optioned and then they go on the shelf for 10 years, or they go on the shelf to never be made into a film. And for me, I'm agent, same thing. So they're a little cynical. They've seen it happen so many times. They've done this for so many years. They get it. And me, I'm brand new. So I think, of course, it's going to be optioned by Chris Pratt. Okay. Of course it's going to be made. even if it's optioned, it's still the percentage of it actually being made, now I know, are so slim. But for me, I was like, well, of course it's going to get made. There's no question about that. So for me, I've always had the same outlook on all of this. But it was really cool to go on set, see it come to life, spend time on the set with everybody, and then see it in post-production and actually get the episodes and then make my notes with the timestamps for each one of the cuts and all that, and work on that up until really just a few weeks ago. And get it exactly where we wanted it to be. So for me, it's been real the entire time. It wasn't like there was an epiphany that, oh, finally it's happening. Like for me, it's been happening since I was 7 years old.
That is a badass line. I like that. That's some good confidence. That's a great attitude. Now, do they keep you in the loop with like, hey, we're thinking about changing this, we're thinking about tweaking this? Because I've heard, we've all heard, if you watch entertainment news, horror stories where some writer sells his screenplays, sells his book rights, and then the movie comes out and they're like, they butchered it, they changed everything, and there's a lot of bitterness. But obviously, you're very happy. But how much of a conversation is there about like what changes are going to be made?
Yeah, usually they like to get rid of the author right away, just for that reason, because especially unless you're, have a universe already built and your last name is maybe King or Patterson or Grisham or something like that. And even with those guys, like they don't want an author on set saying you ruined my vision or anything like that. But for whatever reason, they broke the mold here and deviated from the paradigm. And Chris wanted me involved. Antoine wanted me involved. They introduced me to the showrunner, who in a series is kind of like the director in a feature film, and that there are multiple directors for different episodes, and the showrunner is managing the whole thing. So they introduced me to him in December of 2019, and had a conversation with him just like we're having today. Talked about my love of books and film, and we talked about how First Blood, the book written in 1972 by David Morrell and never been out of print. This is the 50th anniversary of the publication, actually. And the movie in 1983 with Sylvester Stallone, very different, but both awesome. And so me understanding that it was going to change visually, and then him putting him in his kind of in a comfortable spot with me understanding that and wanting to be a part of this team to help and add value, he was comfortable right away, really. And then we've been inseparable ever since. There's not a day we haven't talked since, to include this morning, since December of 2019. So we worked on that first pilot script together, really him doing it, me learning and just adding things here and there, getting that as good as we could get it. And then he took it with Chris and Antoine, and they shopped it around. It went to Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and Showtime and HBO. And then it got into a bidding war between Netflix and Amazon ended up with it. So, and even then, there's no guarantee that it's going to get made. Like there are so many things that can derail a project that I'm aware of now. But yeah, I never wavered in the fact that we would get this thing as good as we can get it and make it. But yeah, they did all, so because I've been so connected with the showrunner, an executive producer, and the whole thing, that I got to give my input, give my advice, read the scripts that would come out of the writer's room, and we morphed everything around, and we just had such a great team. And there's so much trust, because like you said, there's horror stories about authors that option, and they can do anything they want. Optioning this so early on, before I'd sold one book with a zero following, no one knows who I am, you're not negotiating from a position of strength. And even if you are, you still really write all those rights away. They can do anything that they want, essentially, with your character. But they wanted to keep it true. They saw the fan over the years then. So now it's been a few years since they optioned it, and they got to see this, the fan base grow, the readership grow, the engagement on social media, how important that authenticity piece is, what differentiates this novel from others out there. And they've been all in on that authenticity piece, and really wanted to do right by the veteran community in particular, and not have somebody watching you, whether it's a police officer or a firefighter or someone in the military, and say, oh, look at that, I can't believe, finger on the trigger as they're coming around and like they wanted to make sure that we got all those things right. And so they were invested so heavily in that. It was impressive to me, and I couldn't be happier.
Well, I never served in the military. I do know a little bit about guns, and it even drives me crazy where I see something in a movie or a TV show where a guy is like got an AR and the bolt's open and you can tell the mag's empty, and he's pretending like he's about to go into a shootout. I saw one show where a guy didn't even have a magazine and an MP5 running into a shootout. And it's like, how do mistakes like this get made? I mean, come on, these are basic things.
They're basic things, but now I know. And there are one, so now it's it's a shock to me that anything gets made, one, in Hollywood, two, that anything good gets made, because there are so many opportunities to screw these things up. Just like you said, so when Chris is on set and he's waiting to go into a scene, or they're doing another shot, another angle or whatever, and he's getting his like blood on his face touched up over here, the director's talking to him here, there's an armorer next to him with a rifle, waiting. So when all those people are done, they show him, hey, clear and safe, or they show him, hey, the magazine, hey, these are the type of blanks that we're using, because there's different types depending on how close you are to somebody else, and talks to him, hey, this is the 5-meter ones, or whatever it is, I forget exactly, but I think there's 3 different types, maybe 4. They show him, talk to him about it, or if it's clear and safe, they show him it's clear and safe, hand it to him, he checks it, boom, he knows what he's doing. But at the same time, like if someone had put on the scope backwards or whatever, and there's all these things going around, there's 350 people, there's helicopters in the sky, there's an explosion that needs to go off over here, there's so much happening. I see how easy it would be for someone to hand an actor an MP5 without a magazine in it, and they just go and they do their thing, and they're not using their sights, and they're not doing a mag change or whatever, and that's the shot that you get. Or even if you reshoot it, then 8 months later in post-production, when there's someone in front of the screen who has no background in firearms whatsoever, is like, oh, why didn't they put this one in? This is a much better shot over here. And they put the one in that's not supposed to be used, right. Not even realizing that, oh, there's a magazine missing from this MP5. So I can see how it happens, just because there's so much going on set.
So what you had just, this wasn't even on my questions to ask, but what you had just said is very interesting to me about the safety precautions you took, and about how safety was drilled down. So when you see something like the Alec Baldwin situation, which has been in the news nonstop, as someone who's familiar with how film sets, TV sets operate, what do you think when you see a guy allegedly fired a live round directly into a woman behind a camera? I mean, what are your thoughts on it? How can something like that occur?
Yeah, it just seems like one of those preventable things if you'd follow the safety regulations, and as just a citizen, if you have some familiarity with firearms, no matter what, even if it's a totally fake and it's totally inert, or there's shapes which are just plastic that aren't, no movable parts, nothing can come out the end of these things, it's just a piece of plastic. But even with those, like, you still don't want to, point those at people, and it's just because you're in that culture. It's a part of, it's the tools that you use as a citizen to protect yourself and your family. So it's very unnatural to point even a plastic gun at a woman behind a camera, or have your finger on the trigger, or to be pulling back on a hammer, or whatever it might be. Just having some basic familiarity with firearms is it used to be a prerequisite essentially to survive. 120 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, you had to be good at the fighting and good at the hunting if you wanted your family to survive. Certainly for most of human history, that is the case. And only very recently have we got comfortable enough to just outsource that protection to 911, or go to the grocery store to pick up some meat and put it on your table with no connection to the land or the animals that provide that food. When you see the rust thing, it's just so heartbreaking, because it is so preventable. And I got to see how safe they are on these sets, and how that armorer right there. And we had a great guy. And there are people working together. There's the prop guy who has the guns, and then there's that armorer right there whose like sole job is to know the condition of all those firearms, and then walk up and show that actor what's going on with it, and then an actor checks and then goes into the scene. But there's so many safety protocols out there, but those safety protocols, I think, are just reinforced if you already have some sort of familiarity with firearms and firearm safety, like Chris does, and like that armorer did, who was a former Marine and a great Land Cruiser guy. He's awesome.
Nice. Well, that's good to hear that you guys did it right. And obviously, I mean, I don't want to pivot to that, but it's an insane situation. And if basic logic and basic rules get followed, it's probably avoidable. What's crazy is I'm sure you don't pay attention to Alec Baldwin's Instagram. I think 2 or 3 days ago, he was on Instagram ranting and raving about how America needs more gun control. We got to restrict the Second Amendment more. Then obviously there's tons of laws. And I just thought to myself, maybe not the guy to make the face of the pro-gun control movement. Yeah, just my opinion.
Just reflect for a little bit longer, perhaps.
Yeah. So one of the things I write about a lot and our audience loves is it seems like TV is changing a little bit to kind of reflect what the audience of middle America and people who live in the Rockies and not in big cities, what they enjoy. And some examples like Yellowstone, 1883, essentially a lot of the movies Taylor Sheridan's made, those they're very popular and they're gritty and they're dark. In The Terminalist, as you've said, the show's going to be gritty and dark, and those are hits. What do you think it says about what people actually want when those shows blow up? Yellowstone's the most watched show on TV in America. Almost flat out rejects a lot of other of the woke garbage that Hollywood produces.
It's so interesting. I mean, for those entrepreneurial amongst us, it should signal that there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity to make shows for people that live outside of Los Angeles and New York, and that's a huge market. So the person that does that, that starts a streaming service and has high production value shows, filmed, somewhere, let's say Atlanta or whatever it might be, buys sound stages, brings in best and the brightest, and makes the same quality, better quality type films, but really without all that the woke stuff in there, without all that just stuff that's forced in that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the storyline, which is what we're seeing. And I think that's where people really take offense. I mean, there's fine like movies that are about those subjects that we would put in the woke category. Well, that's okay. Yeah, you can watch those and that's fine to make those. But then when it's something that you don't expect it to be forced into, that doesn't have anything to do with the storyline, that is just writers or Hollywood people or whatever injecting this in there because of a moral vanity, so that they can feel good when they go to their parties or give their acceptance speech at the Academy Awards or that sort of a thing, which also goes back also to something that was so great about Set. And it was, so I'm sitting in the video, it's called Video Village, and you have your screens there, an executive producer in your chair, and you're watching, and you have your headsets, and you can hear what's going on and all that stuff. And the other executive producers said they'd never seen this before, in that like the hair and makeup person comes over and she says, hey, my son's going to boot camp tomorrow, Marine boot camp, and he's a huge fan. Would you sign a book? And I always brought a big box of books with me to Set, and I would sign these things. Or somebody comes over and says, hey, my son is going on his first deployment, in a couple of weeks, and I'd love to get him a book. And he follows you on Instagram or whatever it is. And God, people just wanted to come up and they wanted to talk about motorcycles, they want to talk Land Cruisers, they want to talk knives, they want to talk guns, and really usually people stay away from that Video Village part of it, but people just came over and wanted to talk about those things. And so out of the 350 people, let's say on a set, what those of us that look at it from the outside usually, and maybe catch a snippet of the Golden Globes or the Academy Awards or whatever, and you see an actor up there, or a director, maybe a producer giving some crazy speech, that's people's vision of Hollywood. But really that's one person, and there were 350 people on a set under that just want to put food on the table, that are just doing their jobs to the best of their ability, and they're doing it. They are so good. Like they're like, just I talked about that armorer, that's his only job, is to do that. And now I understand why these union rules are in place, because if he's like, oh, let me help with that over there, or, hey, can you do this, and have him go over here and do that, what's he not doing? He's not doing his job. Yeah. Firearm. So these productions are like a Lamborghini, and they're flying down the road over 200 miles an hour. And if somebody's not doing their job and they're not the best in the world at it, then it's like, wait, what's that? Oh, wait, okay, we got to turn this thing, or we got to get this to the mechanic. So everybody is so good at their job, but now I see why you can't do something else on set. You have to be solely focused on your job. And that the Rust thing obviously is a horrible situation, but what I saw on set is that's why, is because you have to be focused only on your job to keep this thing going at 200 miles an hour safely.
That's fascinating. Okay, last question on the TV aspect, then we're going to dive into your military stuff, which I know the audience is all about that. Do you think right now we're living in the golden era of TV? Because we see A-list, certified A-list actors doing TV. You had Matthew McConaughey in True Detective, which kind of kicked the whole thing off. We've seen several other series. You have Kevin Costner doing Yellowstone. You got Chris Pratt doing The Terminalist. Do you think this is, when we look back in 40 years, like this will be like the greatest era of TV we possibly seen in a very long time?
I would say that it is, rather than saying the golden age, I would say it's the Wild West right now, because with streaming services and everything else that's going on, trying to capture that market share, this appetite for content being locked down for the last couple of years, getting used to not going to the movies to sit down, but getting used to sitting at home, watching things, wanting more options. I'd say it is right now the Wild West. There's really not that many rules in place yet. There's algorithms, and they have have a ton of information. Oh my goodness, they're collecting on all of us and our viewing habits so that they can essentially put together something that'll keep us glued to those screens for longer or make us sign up for their service. So that part is fascinating as well. But Wild West wise, it means like there is not really this paradigm that if you want to now get into and make a show for TV, that you fall into this category right here because it's worked here, 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 and here. Well, no, there are so many unwritten. I guess there's so much out there that you can do creatively because things are not boxed up yet when it comes to streaming services and quote unquote television or watching it here on your screen through a streaming service. So I'd say it's definitely the Wild West days right now.
I love it. I love the era of TV we're living in. It seems like we're getting something great every day. Terminalist, July 1st, right?
First, yep, 8-part series drops all at once, and
Oh,
yeah, everybody did such a great job. And you mentioned Yellowstone 1883, LaMonica Garrett, who's in 1883. He's in Terminalist also. Gosh, he crushes it. I mean, what an awesome guy! Just too cool. We're actually going to do a little event together. I think at Barnes and Noble on my book tour, where he's going to interview me as part of the book tour. But man, what a great guy! And yeah, these are two right in a row. And he went right from doing Terminalist right into 1883, and then they got that out quickly because he hadn't even started yet. He left the series at the end, right during our last week of filming in August of last year, and jumped right into 1883, and that's already out and done. Yeah, amazing. But what a great guy. So yeah, everybody just crushed it. All the actors were normal. Like everybody was just, they were just all incredibly nice and humble and kind and just wanted to do a great job. And I didn't know how they'd be when like reading the material. Like, oh, what did my agent sign me up for? What did I say yes to? Oh my goodness. But none of them were like that. They were all fantastic.
well, that's great to hear. And it's got a great cast. Like you just said, LaMonica Garrett's in it. Taylor Kitsch, he's in it too.
Uh-huh. No better guy for that role than him. I mean, and same thing with Chris, like those guys, incredible. Jean Triplehorn, amazing. As Hartley, as Secretary of Defense, she crushes. Of course, she's in Basic Instinct for those of us that grew up during that time frame. And she was so wonderful. She texted me, direct messaged me the day that she got the part. And we've been talking ever since and got to hang out quite a bit. And I just can't say enough great things about her.
Awesome. I can't wait July 1st. I will be reviewing it, of course, for dailycaller.com. So make sure if you're watching this to check that out as well. Let's dive into the military stuff now. You joined the Navy SEALs in the 1990s, correct?
That's right. Came boot camp 96, got to BUD/S January of 97. Yeah.
So my first question on this specifically is, do you remember where you were when 9/11 happened and what were your initial thoughts when you saw the planes hit the towers?
Yeah, so I was my second deployment, 2 weeks into that second deployment. I was the intelligence rep for our SEAL platoon, so I was well aware of Al Qaeda, well aware of Osama bin Laden. I just read a book on him, and so I was more keyed in than I think than many. I actually had to go the next day and give a brief to the commanding officer of what was called Unit 1 at the time, which is like a logistics hub in Guam, and talk to him about Osama bin Laden and talk to him about Al Qaeda and talk about the history and all of that. And just because I was just growing up studying terrorism and insurgencies and counterinsurgencies and doing all that well before my time in the military, I just had this foundation upon which to build, kind of like the same with the writing today. And that same study of warfare also bleeds over into the writing, obviously. But I was in my room. It was about midnight in Guam in the barracks, and I was enlisted at the time. I became an officer later, but people started banging on doors and the phone started ringing, and we went down to the basement of the barracks, and we had one TV down there, and we watched the Twin Towers fall on television. So we all thought that we were going to jump on planes the next day and go right to Afghanistan, but that was not the case. It took a little while to get organized there, and for the senior level leaders to come up with a strategy, and we thought we were going to be a part of that and go right in, and we did get on planes, and we thought we were going to Afghanistan, but instead on the way from Guam to the Middle East, we went to Kuwait, and we ended up taking over for SEAL Team 3, who was at the time doing shipboarding operations to enforce a UN embargo on oil against Iraq. So we ended up doing those shipboarding operations for them, meaning ship leaves Iraq, takes a sharp left-hand turn to head towards Iran, and you have a certain amount of time, depending on weather conditions and all that stuff, to get on board, take it over, and turn it over back into international waters. So we did that. that while Team 3 went into Afghanistan. But and then we thought we were going to miss it. Like we all thought, oh man, we're doing the shipboarding, and before September 11th, shipboarding was the deal. But now it's not the deal. Now everybody wants to be in Afghanistan, and we were like, man, we're all going to miss this thing. And then obviously the next 20 years played out, and that was not really something we needed to worry about.
Yeah, that I'd never even heard about this shipboarding stuff. So when you're getting on these ships, are there like Iraqi like armed individuals trying to stop you from taking over these vessels, or are they want no part of you?
They have what are called passive countermeasures, meaning they leave at night in horrible weather, so that it's hard to fly a helicopter. And if you do fly a helicopter, they take barbed wire and they put it all over the deck. So if you throw a fast rope out, it gets tangled in that barbed wire. They take all the ladders that are on different parts of the ship and they cut those off, and then they seal up every door. They weld shut every door and window, so that they can get out into those international waters, take that left-hand turn, and then get towards into Iraq, into Iranian waters, because then you have to get off as an American. If you're on and you're trying to get in, you're trying to breach, you have an exothermic torch, you have a quickie saw, and you're trying to make entry into these things so you can turn it around. So if they can just delay you enough, then they win and they make it to Iranian water. So it's rather than being armed, they're just passive countermeasures, and you have to figure out how to defeat them.
That is wild. I just turned 30. In 30 years of life, I've never once heard a story about anything like this. Why not? This is wild.
It was my only time in the SEAL teams that I did anything real world close to the water, other than having like water in my Camelback or something.
Oh, I like that. That's a good quote. So I want to fast forward then to the second part of this question. So you remember where you were when 9/11 happened. Where were you when you heard the news that SEAL Team 6, Dev Grew, had flown into Pakistan and smoked bin Laden?
Yeah, so I was getting ready to go to Iraq for a deployment. I think I was leaving the next day, or maybe it was 2 days later. I mean, it was a little while ago now, but it was fairly short. Just getting ready to go, and I saw the first there was an announcement that the president's going to speak and address the nation, and I was like, okay, what is that? And then there was some more news about, oh, this is going to be about bin Laden, and then they started leaking some more stuff out there on the news, and then of course, the president addresses the nation and lets us know. But yeah, I had some friends on that mission, and two of them had called me in a couple of weeks before that, and they were weird calls, kind of like the "Hey, take care of my family, something happens to me" type of a call. And at the time, I thought it was for something else, but then as soon as I saw the president come out, I was like, oh, those guys did it. It's pretty cool.
Do you remember who the first public person to tweet about the bin Laden raid was?
No, well, the guy that was somebody in Abbottabad was texting about, hey, there's helicopters overhead. I don't know what
I'm saying first like famous American. Do you remember who the first famous American was?
I was not on social media at all back then. I didn't even, no idea.
It was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and he
Really?
tweeted about it hours. This is a true story, and every year on the anniversary it comes up. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson tweeted hours before the news had even said anything. He said, I just heard something that happened in like Pakistan. Very proud to be an American. Can't wait for anyone else to hear. He has never revealed to this day where he got that info from, but he has a family member that was either a DevGru intel officer or was an intelligence officer of some kind. And so the theory's always been that's who told him.
Well,
But Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson broke the news on Twitter that bin Laden had been killed.
that is crazy. I was still like 8 years away from having a Twitter account or something at the time. But wow, that's incredible. I've never heard that before. I'm shocked that no one's ever mentioned that. That's wild.
Yeah, you can look it up sometime. I'm not BSing you. That's 100%
Oh, I believe
true.
it. Yeah, I believe it.
Was there anything that you train all these years? Now we have a war in Afghanistan underway. We have a war in Iraq underway. You do time in both of them, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
Was there anything that really surprised you when you got there on the ground and you're doing missions from what you thought it was before, you're in a live situation and real bullets? What was different from what you thought going in?
Let's see. I mean, I've been trained up fairly well. I'd done that. The shipboardings weren't really combat, but they're quote unquote real world operations. I trained extensively for it. So I guess I don't remember. I remember being just focused on the mission. I don't remember being shocked until a couple of years later when I go into a situation that's really like kind of World War II type movies, Urban Combat, Najaf, August 2004, where it wasn't just going out hitting a target, coming back to base, getting intel from whoever we grabbed out of their bed in the middle of the night, and then going to hit another one, but going to support a conventional army operation to retake an entire city. And that was 27 Cav led the way there. And I was just a sniper team leader. So I had a few guys with me, and we had the sniper capability, of course, but we could also talk to aircraft. We could pre-plan aircraft missions and doing something called pre-planned call for fire, because most all of us had that qualification. And a lot of the Army people in the convention inside, for whatever reason, did not have that qualification. So I had a great relationship with the battalion commander at 27 Cav, just kind of showed up and said, hey, we're here to help. Here's our capabilities, and how can we help? And so going through that, where you're really not, no one's supporting you, you're supporting big army, and seeing that logistics train taking street by street, having that logistics train come up behind with water, with food, with ammunition, being able to maneuver Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles, being able to call in aircraft and just level buildings, and really pushing the enemy through the streets, setting up sniper positions, staying there for a little bit, coming up with the next plan of how you're going to maneuver and take the next few blocks with those Abrams and Bradleys and maneuver elements. So that was probably the time when I was like, wow, this is like those movies I used to watch with my dad on the couch as a kid, about World War II. And I guess that's one that stands out anyway as the most kind of eye-opening, simply because there was no break. It was like a 2-week campaign. We were like really in pitched street battles for 11 of those days, I think, if memory serves. And there's a great book about it called Battle for the City of the Dead, that talks about that campaign, because there's a big cemetery there. But yeah, that one was, just because it was so different, stands out from the others, because it was day, it was night, and it was constant movement. We weren't really setting the time and the place of the engagement like we usually did, doing direct action missions. It was just, hey, fight, take this city over. We're not stopping until we get it. So that one stands out.
And so you said that was '04, right?
Yeah, August of '04. So it was a little warm in the Jaffa Iraq for those who have been.
So at this point, Saddam's obviously been deposed. The Iraqi army's been, they're long gone. So you're fighting foreign fighters, insurgency. Like, who's the main enemy here?
Yeah, the Jaish al-Mahdi militia. So Muqtada al-Sadr's militia is the main enemy there, and Old Town Najaf is one of the holiest sites. The Imam Ali Mosque is one of the holiest sites in all of Islam, and that's where they fell back to eventually, which meant that we couldn't level it, even though they were all in there. The interim Iraqi government came up with some sort of a ceasefire, and all of those insurgents we've been fighting for the last 2 weeks, got to leave. We got to watch them leave through our scopes and turn over their weapons to the Iraqi National Guard. And then we go back to fight them another day. So, but I guess surprising, going back to your question about being surprised, I guess I was more surprised about on the strategic level than anything on the tactical level, meaning when I came back the next time around, so I was there in '04, '05, '06, seeing that nothing had really improved. The road from the Green Zone to Baghdad International Airport was even more dangerous, more IEDs, more attacks, and we were doing our best to really create this insurgency and fuel this insurgency strategically because of what we were doing tactically. So that was interesting, but doesn't really affect what you do on the battlefield. I mean, you got to go out there and continue to crush the enemy. But when you just took a breath, you're like, what are we? How are we helping the situation right here? This doesn't seem to be benefiting really anyone right now, what we're doing.
My very next question, I kid you not, on the list was one of the takeaways I had from your interview with Mark Owens, and in the terminal list, there's a prominent, I'm not going to spoil anything, there's a prominent naval character in it who is a villain, or he's not a great guy, right? You find out obviously later in the book. You don't maybe seem, correct me if I'm wrong, just my interpretation, you don't seem to maybe think that guys at the highest level or politicians in DC, you don't maybe have the greatest respect for people far removed from the battlefield. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that'd be a fair assessment. That when you look at it, you see for the last 20 years, senior level leaders failing up. And you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that really stood up at those senior level leaders and didn't just do what their predecessor had done. Meaning, if you go back to archival footage of these generals testifying in front of Congress, answering questions in front of different committees, they said the exact same thing. Take the year off, and the general says something in 2003, very similar to what they say in 2008, very similar to what they say in 2013. It's we need more resources, we need more troops, say the Iraqi army or the Afghan security forces or whatever, national army. They're making great strides. We're hitting our milestones, and they all say the exact same thing. And there's zero accountability. That's really the point. The point is that if we had messed up tactically on the battlefield, we'd be sent home, we'd be fired, we'd be court-martialed. Yet you fail strategically and you fail upwards. And those same people are now on boards. They get to go to a couple meetings a year at, let's say, I don't know, McDonnell Douglas or Raytheon or whatever Lockheed Martin, and all those sorts of things. So there is definitely a nexus between lobbyists, politicians, senior level military leaders, think tanks, and that exists. That's an ecosystem right there. And it's overused, military industrial complex, but people should listen to that entire speech to put it in context from Eisenhower, not just the clip that usually is played. But there is something that's grown since the end of World War II. There's a real thing out there, and it's also about the same time we changed the name of the Department of War to the Department of Defense. And that's always been interesting to me as well, because that's a different mindset. And we haven't really done very well in these wars since we changed that name, and since we stopped holding senior level military leaders accountable. Now, George Marshall is known for the Marshall Plan after World War II, but what's so important is what he did before World War II and during World War II, meaning he held senior level military leaders accountable. If they did not meet the standard, they were gone. And he put the people in place, all those names that we know today, those military leaders that crushed Japan and crushed Germany, Marshall got them into those positions, and he took people out of those positions, more importantly, that were not the right fit. And one of the most important elements to him and to Karl von Clausewitz as well was common sense. And that's why people could look at August of last year and see our withdrawal from Afghanistan they had no military background, never read a book about the military or strategy or tactics, and still say, hey, wait a second, this doesn't seem quite right. Why didn't we have some base with a lot of standoff distance at Bagram? Why do we just put our sons and daughters into this position, tactically disadvantageous position? So they didn't need a military background. They just needed a little bit of common sense. And now the news barely reports on what happened there and that rush to failure at the end. We had 20 years to prepare for that. And that's what our senior military leaders did. And there's political leaders. Obviously, we have a commander in chief up there who bears the responsibility, but we have senior level military leaders also who bear a large part of that and have never been held accountable. Well, I hold them accountable in my books. It's very therapeutic to write these things.
Yeah, well, I can tell I've touched a bit of a nerve. The one thing about the Afghanistan withdrawal that to me as a guy in the news didn't make any sense from holding people responsible. When we killed that family with that drone strike, the guy who was running the Pentagon press people and then the high ranking officers, they get out there and they literally said, we followed the plan. We did all the checks, just was the wrong target. Okay, so who's getting fired? Who's getting suspended or who's getting demoted? The answer was no one was.
Zero. Yeah, no one.
Zero people were held accountable. But if a ground level guy, we all know what would happen if someone made a mistake on even a firing range. Yep. That to me was mind boggling. But anyways, sorry, I don't want to get too deep into this.
There's a great book called The Afghanistan Papers by Craig Whitlock. I had him on the podcast, but he, through Freedom of Information Act requests, 2 lawsuits against the federal government, had these interviews that people thought were going to remain classified, opened up, and he juxtaposes what they said privately in these interviews to what they said in front of Congress, and those are 180 out. So essentially, you have those same military leaders who continued to fail up, now proven as liars, essentially lying to the American people, lying to Congress, lying to their troops, worst off. And he paints that picture with documents. It's not just opinion, with documents in the Afghanistan Papers.
Well, I've never read that. I'll have to check it out. The viewers, you heard it, the Afghanistan Papers. So on an entertainment war paths crossing, I like war movies. I love Band of Brothers growing up. I probably watched it when I was way too young. I read the book. I've read a bunch of Stephen Ambrose stuff. In your opinion, what is the most realistic war movie that's ever been made?
Ooh, realistic. The first one that jumps out is Black Hawk Down, just because I think it was one of those movies that did move the genre forward. There, it's based on a real event. I know people that were there, and it's Hollywood still, and it's 90s equipment and all that sort of a thing. But I think that movie stands out to me. But then of course Band of Brothers, but the miniseries, and obviously I wasn't in World War II. My grandfather was. He did not make it home, which is I think one of the reasons that I was heard that call of the service so early on. But so I can't speak to exactly what it was like, but Band of Brothers stands out to me. I mean, just the sounds and the camaraderie. Once again, those more senior level leaders. They don't really go into the strategic level leaders, but more operational level. That dynamic there. So Band of Brothers stands out to me for sure as one of the greatest war movies, even though it's a series.
Miniseries.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question about Band of Brothers real quick. And I've asked this question in other interviews. At the very end of Band of Brothers, you know how they would always have the real guys for like 60 seconds after every episode? There's a line that I remembered it since the first time I heard it. One of the real guys said, when I came home from the war, I lost my confidence of feeling like I could do anything. We felt invincible over there, and I didn't feel that way anymore. Mm-hmm. Did you ever struggle with feeling like, hey, we were kicking indoors, we were the apex predator over there? And then when you left the military, like, did you lose any of that confidence, or because you had your next mission of writing the book ready to go, you just rolled on to the next thing?
Yeah, no, I was very fortunate in that I got to take a breath after my last deployment, and had a couple of years while I knew I was getting out, where I was at a shore duty at BUD/S as the operations officer, and knowing that what I was going to do next. I knew my passion was now writing. I had done my military time. I was not taking guys downrange anymore. I wasn't responsible to them, their families, the country, the mission, and now it was time to transition out and identify that next thing, which I'd already identified very early on, which was writing. And then my mission was taking care of my family. So to put that passion for writing and the mission of taking care of my family together, I think that gave me that purpose. And a lot of people are missing that purpose. And it doesn't have to be the military. It can be any sort of a transition from a job. It can be the death of a loved one, a divorce, doesn't matter. But some sort of a life transition, and figuring out and being able to articulate what your purpose is moving forward, I think is probably the most important thing you can do to build on whatever foundation you've built up to that point. So for me, that was very clear. And then I was always very good at coming home from deployment and flipping the switch. There's only one time where my wife had to say, "Hey, snap out of it." And it's because it was Iraq, height of the war, 2006, and we were doing exactly what you just said. And I was working for a 3-letter government agency, and I was the only military attached to it, and it was just awesome, and it had a lot of autonomy, and it actually influences some of my novels, all of them really. But when I got home, I wanted to be back. I was like, man, I just kept thinking about being back in that position because it was so great. And then my wife was like, "Hey, snap out of it." And I was like, "Oh, I guess I better snap out of it. I'm not there anymore." So, but that was really the only time that I had a brief moment of wanting to be back in the mix. I mean, you always want to be in the mix, but you also realize, hey, there's deployment cycles here. There's workups with your troop, with your platoon, team, and then we're going to go down and we're going to come back and we're going to do that again. And so you realize that you don't have any control over that. You just have to be as prepared as you possibly can to go to war at any given time in case there's something that happens that deviates from that cycle.
And when the wife tells you it's time to snap out of it, or the girlfriend, maybe in my case, it's time to go. Last military question on this stuff. I ask this to every military person I interview, no matter what branch they're from. Gets varying reactions, but it is my favorite question to ask. Everyone watching this knows exactly what's about to come. Delta Force versus SEAL Team 6. Who's more elite and why? And I understand you're completely biased. That's fine. Who's more elite and why?
I don't know. So I've never served in either one of those two, but I read both books growing up. One called The Delta Force by the first commanding officer of that unit, Charlie Beckwith, and then also Rogue Warrior by Richard Marcinko, first commanding officer of the Navy Tier 1 counterterrorist unit. So grew up idolizing everyone that has been in both of those commands, and now I know people from both. Some of my best friends are from both, served in both, been downrange in combat with both. And so I just think we're extremely fortunate as a nation to have both those units out there.
That was a very politically, diplomatically safe answer. So I like that. That was good.
Well, not having been on the ground at both of them and being able to compare, I don't think I can answer any other way.
No, that's fine. I just always got to ask. I did an interview with a guy named Bob Keller, who was in the unit for a long, long time. And when I asked him that question, he looked at me and he kind of hesitated. And if Bob watches this, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. And he was like, well, what did the SEAL Team 6 guys say? And I was like, they were very complimentary of Delta Force. He was like, okay, yeah, no, we liked them. They're good guys. It was like he was waiting to see like if it was going to be a diplomatic answer, or if there was going to be some trash talking. But all the SEAL Team 6 guys, all the Delta guys, they're all badass dudes. We're very fortunate as a country that everyone in the military exists, but those Tier 1 guys, it's next level. You're talking about superhero type stuff. So just my opinion on it. All right, let's dive into some current events. And I really want to get your take on some of this stuff. I'm looking at it right now in front of me. Let's start with Ukraine. Okay. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we heard a million different news stories about how Ukraine would fall in 3 to 5 days. The government was going to flee. This was going to be over before the weekend. I think it started on Wednesday. Why do you think that it looks like, Russia has taken territory, certainly. They're in control in the East, but they seem to have struggled way more than anyone anticipated. Why do you think that is?
I think oftentimes in dictatorships or an authoritarian regime, you saw it with Saddam, your senior level leaders don't necessarily have the freedoms to voice their opinions as they may in, say, this country. Although in this country, I wish they would do it more, perhaps. But as we talked about before, but you give somebody in one of these dictatorships the wrong word, or say, hey, we're not as prepared, or the enemy has these capabilities and we can't counter them. It's kind of like off with your head, off to the gulag type thing. So that's why a lot of these regimes have these issues, is because they're not getting honest assessments. And for me in the military, trust is the most important element of leadership. To me anyway, and whether that's building trust with the guys in your command below you, and getting out there and doing a run, getting the O course, getting on the range, leading them tactically through different scenarios, that sort of a thing, or a 2-minute conversation in the hallway. Like, those are all opportunities to build trust. Same thing with those above you in the chain of command, giving them your honest assessment, even though they might not want to hear it. They can always trust what they're going to get from you is your honest assessment, both above and below you in the chain of command. So I don't think we necessarily have that in a lot of countries around the world, particularly Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, those sorts of places, and other dictatorships that are smaller, not on the radar right now. So I think that's one of the main reasons. So you're not going into a conflict necessarily with the greatest information about your own capabilities and your limitations. Both things are extremely important. So I think that this is just pure speculation, of course, is that might have been a little bit of a shock that they did not roll right in there, unless they wanted to bog down. So that's the other side of it, but I don't know why you would want to do that, especially when most of the Western world thought that you were going to roll over that place in 3 days. You're exactly right on that one. So I think that played into it. That plays into it when you're dealing with some of these countries, is that they don't have honest assessments, therefore they can't make the best decisions.
Judging off of your expertise as a 20-year military veteran, and obviously a guy who's deeply connected to that community, does a lot of research on other stuff, knowing what we know now since the invasion started, we were kind of always told Russia is this powerful military, et cetera, et cetera. Make no mistake, they certainly have capabilities. But if a ground war were to start with NATO forces and Russian forces, how one-sided would that conflict look, just in a ground aspect? I'm not talking about nukes getting lobbed through the air, but planes on planes, ground forces on ground forces, taking in the last 2 months. How do you think it'd be incredibly lopsided?
Well, if you take the nuclear option off the table, you take the cyber off the table, you take the economic warfare off the table. If you take those three things totally off the table, and we just go back to, let's say, 1980 or something like that, but with the technology of today, when it comes to conventional forces, it certainly seems like we overestimated the conventional capabilities of the Russian military. I don't know if you really take anything else from watching what's happened in Russia and Ukraine over the last couple months. So, but that's not the case. There is a nuclear option, and they have more nuclear weapons than we do. And when you corner somebody or corner an animal, and when I talk about cornering, what I mean is the Russian population has been in a steep decline since the end of the Cold War for a variety of reasons. I write about this in True Believer, my second novel. It has a Russian invasion of Ukraine in it. That book came out in 2019. And the research that I did pointed to the fact that, hey, between 2014 and 2022, Russia was going to have to make a move on Ukraine because of the ethnic Russian population in Ukraine. So if they do not want to cease to exist over the next 2 generations, they need that population. So that was, I mean, if I could find that out and come to that conclusion, there's plenty of people out there talking about it. You just had to dig a little bit. And I worked that into a completely fictional storyline. But now Russia has invaded in 2022, which is crazy. But if you look at those numbers and those demographics and the survivability of an entire ethnic population, they are that caged animal. They're that animal in the corner. And when we think about that, and then we think about them having a nuclear option, if they think they're dying anyway in 2 generations, what does that mean about them using some sort of weapons that they would not necessarily otherwise have used if they had multi-generations left to go? And that wasn't a worry. They have the same data. They have better data probably than we do. And it's probably worse than we think it is when it comes to a declining population.
One of the things that fascinated me, and this plays into our own Second Amendment stuff here, and I don't know if you can tell or anyone watching this, I literally have a 50 cal round sitting over my shoulder right now.
I love it. Awesome.
That's the bottle breacher. So I'm a big pro gun guy. One of the things they did in Ukraine was they started arming the civilian population, and the same politicians here in America that will tell you there's no reason for anyone to own a semi-automatic rifle, we're applauding handing out AK-47s on the street over there, which, by the way, I'm all for. If you get invaded, go full Red Dawn. It's time to the Red Dawn option. But what do you think when you see politicians trying to restrict Americans' rights to have weapons, and then at the same time encouraging it in a country 6,000 miles on the other side of the world?
I know it's you can't make this stuff up. It's insane to me that the hypocrisy, but I'm sure there's hypocrisy all through politics, but particularly on this issue on the left, wanting to restrict your rights to own a firearm, to defend the gift of life, something that is explicitly written down as the Second Amendment and is a natural right. It's not given to us by the government. It's just written down to make sure the government can't restrict it. That's a natural right. And it's very natural. If you were to just show up on this planet from who knows where, and we're suddenly attacked, it would be very natural to defend that gift of life, knowing nothing about the Constitution or what laws would allow you to do X, Y, or Z. Defending the gift of life is the most natural thing you can do. And then as a provider, as a citizen, being responsible to defend the lives of your spouse, your kids, your community, that is just the most natural thing in the world. So to have politicians who are surrounded by protective security details, oftentimes paid for by the taxpayer, by the very people they're trying to restrict gun ownership with, calling and applauding Ukrainians for standing up against Russia with an AK it's insane. I mean, it's hard for me to even articulate it because it's just so crazy.
It makes my blood boil to a degree. And I'm not an overly political guy, but that's a topic that makes my blood boil. The other thing that's crazy to me about that is you'll see like a politician hold up like an AR-15 and they'll just make up things about it. Like, this weapon fires 30 bullets every second. It's like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
I know. It's fingers on the trigger, talking about create. It's so, I mean, there's so many memes out there and videos out there that are quite creative and funny. And I guess it would be funnier if the left didn't have so much power and there weren't so many restrictions already on your right to defend yourself and your family. But oh my goodness, yeah, it's just crazy. I just don't even. Yeah, but I write it into the book. I write that into the books, and I do get those reviews. I read them in my negative reviews every now and again, where I'll just kind of read and people say things about Second Amendment or whatever else woven into the novel, and they absolutely can't stand it, and they're never going to read it again. But that same negative review help sell. So keep them coming, because I think that sells them to someone who might actually take the responsibility of defending their lives and the lives of their loved ones seriously. So thank you, negative review people. You're helping me out.
I love it. Well, last thing on what you just said on finger on the trigger. One of the things where I lost my mind laughing, not because it was a funny situation, it was incredibly serious. During the Rittenhouse trial, the prosecutor picked up the gun Rittenhouse had used, the rifle he used, put his finger on the trigger and pointed it at the jury box, like demonstrating what he was doing. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy is lecturing really the country, because it's a televised trial, about guns and all that stuff. And he's pointing a functional but unloaded AR-15 at 12 random people while preaching about response. You can't make this stuff up. You cannot make it up. I
actually believe that's against the law. I think that's kind of, what is that? Some sort of a brandishing
of a weapon?
Yeah, something like that. There, believe me, I'm sure there's a lot. The American Bar Association can't even tell us how many laws are on the books. So I'm sure there's a law against doing that.
Absolutely.
There's a great book called 3 Felonies a Day by Harvey Silverglate that talks about how laws have really changed over time and why they've changed over time, and how the laws used to be written so that I think it was quote unquote the common man, somebody like doing exercise, could understand the sentence, could understand the law. And now that has changed into essentially, you need a law. They're written so broadly by design, and that allows the federal government to go essentially pick anyone they want and go after them. And that I can't recommend that book highly enough.
So one of my old friends used to love that book, and he was actually a lawyer too, so it made a lot of sense. A couple more questions here. I want to talk about kind of COVID and in the context of Elon Musk buying Twitter, because one of the things a couple of years ago, if you said online, like, I think COVID came from a lab, you'd be thrown off Twitter and Facebook, right? And now that's become quite a common theory, right? I don't know if it is for sure. I don't want this video to get banned by YouTube or whatever it might be. But what do you think about like how the information has shifted? And if you didn't play along with the narrative, like they just came for your neck.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, free speech used to be, the First Amendment used to be something that brought us all together as Americans. I remember growing up, it was, hey, I'm going to stand up and fight and die for your right to say something, especially if I don't agree with it. And that was what made us different from the rest of the world. So no matter what we thought about, Second Amendment issues or, whatever else it might be, that First Amendment was something that brought us all together. And now it's being used, it's being weaponized to divide us. And obviously who benefits when we have this division? Well, politicians, of course, to get elected, of course, these social media tech companies, because they get clicks and views and advertising, and they can influence behavior. And what kind of behavior do they want to influence, and thought do they want to influence? Well, you just take a breath and look, and it's not a hard question to answer. We're in, let's see, I was on Joe Rogan in 2020, early May of 2020, and we talked about this very, very thing. And back then, that was what it was like. If you mentioned this coming from a lab, banned. You were a conspiracy theorist. And I just put it in terms of, hey, there's a lab, and it's very close by to this wet market where it's studying the very virus that appears in the wet market. So if I was a police officer and I was investigating a crime of some sort, and there was maybe a connection like that, I might look into it, perhaps. Right. They call that a clue in law enforcement circles. So I brought it up in those terms, and I think Joe was already off YouTube by then and on Spotify, or I forget exactly, but that was early on. But it's just, hey, that it might make sense to at least question it. And I love how Jon Stewart, regardless of what other things he does or says, how he talks about this issue, and he talks about it in terms of, hey, if there's a chocolate outbreak in Hershey, Pennsylvania, you might want to go check with the Hershey people. and ask a
Right.
couple questions up there. And that, hey, I mean, that's it. That's put it in those terms and just look at things with a little bit of common sense. And that's what we don't do anymore in this country. Common sense has left the building, unfortunately, and things are so divisive, and social media has been weaponized to continue to divide us. So being able to take a breath, realize that one, and then go into the pages of history books and look at these foundations of some of these things that these issues, whether it's Ukraine and the history from World War I through World War II to the end of the Cold War, you can see this play out, and then hopefully we can make better decisions going forward, take those experiences and turn those into wisdom going forward. Like take this last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, because we didn't really go back and look at the Soviet experience from 79 to 89. We didn't go back and look at the 3 British excursions. We didn't even have to go back to Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great. The answers to a lot of these things were out there, but we didn't really look. We didn't take the time to study and apply those lessons from history and turn them into wisdom. And we think of things in terms of 4-year election cycles, 8-year election cycles for the really deep thinkers among us. But we would be much better served if we took a breath and looked at things more long-term and spent time in the pages of the history books.
That's very well said. Did it surprise you at all how many people, I want to word this careful. Like, I was taught growing up as a very proud American, you should question a lot of what you're told from the higher ups. Now, when your parents
Question
tell you to clean
authority.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Not when your parents tell you to clean the kitchen when you're 8 years old, of course, but like, don't just blindly trust what the government says or what your mayor says. And to me, what was really disappointing is we have people, it seems a large chunk of the American public who's like, oh, well, they said it, it must be true. I'm like, that's not really the baseline of the American thinker. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's that's why I try to talk about going back to the earliest days of this nation, what was sacrificed so that we have these rights, what was sacrificed so we have these options, these opportunities, these freedoms, what people risked if they made it, what they sacrificed if they didn't, or if maybe they came home missing an arm, missing a leg, traumatic brain injury before it was even a term, post-traumatic stress before it was even something that could be diagnosed. And that's what I try to do with our kids anyway, is instill that pride and that appreciation, more importantly, appreciation of what was sacrificed so that we could have these freedoms that we have today. And now we're voting people into office that want to curtail those rights. They want to limit our freedoms. And they have some strong allies on their side with tech giants and donations. And it's a very interesting time to grow up, but I hope that our kids have an appreciation. I took my daughter to Pearl Harbor this last December for the 80th anniversary commemoration events. We took with the Best Defense Foundation, Donnie Edwards Foundation, we took 64 veterans over there. They were aged 96 to 104. So they were all in wheelchairs, getting them to on and off the buses, to the events, to their rooms, to the dinners, to lunch, to breakfast. And so she had this touch point with that generation, and she'd heard me talk about it. She heard me talk about my grandfather, her great grandfather, who didn't make it home, who was a Marine pilot in the Pacific Theater. But to sit down with these guys and to hear their stories and hear what they did and how they lied about their age to get in at age 15, 16, 17, to go over there and serve. That was a life-changing trip for her. Now we're going to go to Normandy this year and do the same thing over there. But if you don't have that appreciation for what was sacrificed, I think you end up in the situation that we're in today, being okay with government having more power, limiting your options and opportunities because you're going to be taken care of by the nanny state or whatever it might be, for giving student loan debt to get a segment of the voter block. I mean, it just takes taking a breath, studying these things, and then making an educated decision when you get into that voting booth.
That was all. Wow. That I'm gonna have to clip that as its own. So that was very well said. I agree with you. I had a family member who was KIA in Korea. He was a pilot. He was shot down. I actually have his war medals are actually sitting in a safe about 6 feet off the side of the screen right now. He had 6 of them, and my grandma gave them to me. And I love history, but one of the things is she's getting older. She's not going to be here forever. And the important thing is that his memory is not lost on her great grandkids or someday my grandkids, whatever it might be. And I agree with you. It's very important. Last question. You've been very generous with your time, very gracious. It's been a great interview. Last question. It's kind of a deep one, but a fun one. When we think about the name Jack Carr in 40, 50, 60 years, when 70 years, when you're gone, and no one lives forever, right? What will have been the legacy that if everything went right for you in 70 years, this is how Jack Carr is remembered?
Hopefully it's through my kids, I guess, and you won't know that until they grow up and become hopefully good, productive citizens of this country. So I think that's really the only legacy that I'm concerned about is theirs. But if we're talking specifically about books and movies and that sort of thing, what's interesting today is that this interview will be out there on a cloud, on a server somewhere, for great grandchildren to look back on and watch. And we didn't have that up until very recently. So this is the first time, the first generation, where you'll be able to go back and see your parents, your grandparents, as you keep going down the line, your great grandparents as we keep going forward, hopefully as a nation, and you'll back and watch these things. So you'll have a visual representation. You'll be able to get to know that person through these interviews, and that sort of a thing. But we didn't have that. If you think about someone 1945, 55, 65, 75, maybe there's a couple grainy videos. If they were at a certain level of prominence, maybe they got them on CBS, ABC, NBC, but that was very uncommon. Obviously today, much more common to do something like this and to have it as a video archive for future generations. So they'll get to find out, hey, what was important to my grandfather? What was important to my great grandfather? It was important to my dad. I kind of remember him talking about this stuff or whatever it might be. And so it's an interesting thing to consider. So this is a visual record for future generations.
Well, I loved your first answer was good enough for me. Your kids, I think that's a very great, wholesome and fatherly and family way to look at it. But also the follow-up's great too. Anyways, Jack, this was awesome. I've been a big fan of yours ever since your publicist sent Terminal List out here. I can't wait for July 1st. I'm going to hype the living hell out of that show for all the followers. Check out Terminal List. Check out Terminal List on Amazon July 1st as well. And thank you very much for spending an hour and a half with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I sincerely appreciate it. Hope we can do it again sometime.